Hi, Rabbi Buxbaum. Happy to be with you today.
We're very, very happy, very excited. I feel like we've been working on this one for a long time. All your travels throughout the world, we finally have you. So welcome, welcome. I want to begin by asking you a question that I ask all the guests because I know you. I've been following you. I admire you and your wonderful, wonderful work. But not all of the audience or listeners know who you are yet. So let's just begin with me asking you, like, who are you and what is it that you do and what drives you behind the things that you do?
Well, how long have you got for that one?
This will be
The
part one of
uh, so who I am, I am both a rabbi and a person in business. I've never earned my living from being a rabbi. That's something I've just done from a perspective of passion. And I've been in a number of different businesses, but started off in international commodity trading many years ago. And today I had a consulting company. We can talk about that a little bit later on. I live in Israel. I lived in the United States for 22 years and came originally from South Africa. My father was an important rabbi in South Africa. My great uncle was a very great rabbi known throughout the world, Rabbi David Lapin. And so that's a little bit of the background.
your family's many. It's a whole rabbinic family. You have Rav Elia Lapian, and you said your father was a rabbi, and then your brothers, I believe, are rabbis as
My
well.
brothers are both rabbis. Yeah, they're also not practicing professionally as such, but certainly teaching. And yes, lots of cousins who are rabbis. A big rabbinic family.
By the interesting, just fun fact, I don't know if I ever shared this with you before, but my brother lived in San Jose for a while, and I think one of your brothers was his rabbi in San Jose many years ago.
Oh, amazing. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, so we're all connected. But did you specifically, at any point in your career, you held a pulpit as well?
Well, I started my own shul. I didn't really want to work as a pulpit rabbi. I wanted intellectual independence, and for that I needed to have financial independence. So I founded my own shul in South Africa and built that up, and I was the rabbi of that shul clearly, and taught there. Later on, for a short period, I was the rabbi of a shul in Venice and in California.
The famous
And
Venice shul, right?
the famous
Where
shul
all the
on the
rollerbladers and
That's it,
go by when
the
they're
shul on the
going down.
beach. It had fallen into disuse somewhat. My brother had revived it many years ago. He then left and moved on to Seattle, and it kind of ran down again. And when I got to California in 1997, we resuscitated and got it all vibrant again. So that was a nice period. And here in Ra'anana in Israel, I also help a shul, but not in a formal rabbinic role.
I want to ask you about that. There's something that you just said that captured my attention. Um, it's the role of the rabbi, the role of being in the rabbinate. You know, you mentioned that you didn't want to do that. You wanted to have financial independence. I think I've heard someone, I think it was someone on this podcast, said a very sharp line once. They said that, it's a sad state of sort of the American rabbinate that, rabbis are supposed to be spiritual leaders, but simultaneous to that, they're also like employees of the board. They have the board sort of telling them what to do, really making the major decisions for the synagogues, and in a sense controlling them. Is there an inherent contradiction in the way we are structuring the rabbinate over here in America, maybe throughout the world? I don't know, I'm saying America, in the sense that, like, they're supposed to be our spiritual leader, but yet it's so and you find so many disaster stories, rabbis and boards and butting heads over money, and it makes it petty. Is there a problem with the way we have structured our institutions and our relationship with our rabbis?
I think you're touching on something important. There's a huge problem. The problem is institutionalized religion, any institutionalized religion. The Torah, Jewish religion, was never intended to be institutionalized, other than the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem in the old days. They've never really been institutions in that sense of the word. Rabbis generally had their own sources of income. They had little shops. They were in business. Their wives worked. they had various ways of earning a living. The Rambam, as we know, was a physician. Many great rabbis found other ways of supporting themselves. And they, by nature, the shul is not a big institution because of Shabbat. People need to live around the shul. So how many people can be within walking distance of a shul? Leaving aside the high rises that we have today in some cities, but certainly the intention was that it was a community of people who were quite close, and there was a rabbi. Once you build an institution, you need funding. Once you need funding, the rabbi becomes an important promoter of the funding or inhibitor of the funding. If people don't like what he's saying, they withhold the funds. That creates a problem for the board. So they firstly, they need the rabbi not to alienate people who are giving funds. And secondly, they need the rabbi to support and to help fundraise. So his job becomes political and commercial and institutional. And the whole idea of being a teacher becomes less and less important when that's really the essence of who and what he is. Teacher, not only in standing in front of a classroom was preaching to a shul, but even in the one-on-one relationships of taking care of people who are going through difficult times or happy times, they're all teaching moments. And the rabbi, more than anything, is to bring the wisdom of the Torah to the people who are struggling with life day to day. But he just doesn't have time to do that, which is incredibly tragic.
Wow. So do you see any models? I'm fascinated by this topic for many reasons, but do you see any model today that you think like that model, like they do it right, that's the way it should be? Or do you have any ideas for like what would be a healthy model?
There are a few shuls in communities in the United States and elsewhere, similar to the one that I established in South Africa, where the rabbi actually establishes the community, runs it, manages. There isn't even a committee. We didn't have a committee. We didn't have membership fees. People just voluntarily donated. It wasn't an institution. And there are other shuls like that. They tend to be smaller shuls. Some of them have become much bigger. And I think the Hasidim have a better sense of how this can be built, where the Rebbe is really the authority and people serve his cause rather than him serving their cause. I think you've got that. And even the way the Chabad has been built up over the last few decades, where individual rabbis go out and start communities and they fund the communities. And most of these communities don't have committees. The rabbi is fully responsible for it. So I think there are places where this model is breaking down. And I think that with COVID also, I think we saw people suddenly discovered it's fun to daven with a little minyan, in the park or on the street or in somebody's home, and that there's no need for these massive institutionalized shuls with the expenses attached and all the just the structures around it.
Yeah. Do you think, just going back to something that you said before, do you think today, the American rabbi of today, should also have another source of income? His income shouldn't be fully dependent on his pulpit?
So it's not really possible because of the enormity of his responsibilities in the community. They overwork them, the same as in many professions and businesses. We're overworking people. We're trying to squeeze every last cent we can out of people's value. And we're not leaving them the space to flourish. We're strangulating people. And community rabbis in the United States are strangled for shortage of time. And a rabbi can effectively handle 20 or 30 families who actively need him. Now, not every family needs a rabbi all the time. So you might be able to handle 100 families, assuming that only 20 of them need him at any particular time. But rabbis are handling hundreds of families and the finances, and they've got to entertain, and they've got to provide programming. It's just not feasible for them to have an independent source of income unless they're independently wealthy.
So back to you. So back to your life and your story. So growing up in a family of rabbis and also entering, I guess, early on in your life into the rabbinate, where did you get the skills, the abilities to go now into business consulting, strategic leadership consulting? Like, where did that come from?
Well, I didn't start with that. So in the beginning, as I mentioned, I worked for a commodities trading company and had wonderful mentors and teachers in that. It was an international business, a big business, and they put me through just every single part of the business to learn the business. So that was a hands-on studying opportunity. Then I built my own business, which was in the jewelry business, importing and distributing pearls in South Africa, and that was an interesting experience. And it was only after those two businesses, each of them I dedicated about 7 years to, that I started feeling I didn't really want to spend that much of my time doing business. I didn't have a passion for business. I had a passion for teaching, and so I started looking at whether the Torah might have solutions for some of the biggest challenges facing business in the next 20 years. This goes back 30 years ago. And so I got a group of CEOs of major multinational companies together, and we spent some time actually mapping out what we believed would be the biggest challenges for business worldwide over the next 20 years. And then I took some time out and looked at Torah and at the Talmud to see, do we have anything on that? Well, clearly, when it comes to matters of technology and finance and things like that, the Torah is not where you're going to get the answers. You can get some guidelines, but you're not going to get the answers. But we realize most of the business issues are around thinking and behavior. It's the way people think and the way people act. And when it comes to thought and action, what better source of wisdom is there than the Torah? So I started researching solutions to the human elements of business, the way people think, that's the strategy side, and the way people behave, that's the leadership side, using the Talmud as the source of inspiration and content.
So can you take us through a couple of, I'd be curious to know, what were some of the challenges that you had identified back then, and what were some of the things, the aspects of the Torah, the Talmud that you saw as being the guidance that would help?
So some of the big challenge was competitive convergence. As technology and globalization were going to become more and more prominent, that was just at the early stages. We're talking about the early 90s, even the end of the 80s. We saw that companies were going to become more and more like one another. They were going to produce more and more products that are like one another, and the only way they could compete is price. And therefore, there would be a major efficiency drive, which we in fact saw coming, and we've actually seen happening. And that major efficiency rise, we didn't see the degree to which technology would provide the efficiencies. But what we did assume was that these major efficiency drives would cause people to become very pressured, that businesses would squeeze people to a ridiculous degree, and people's emotional, social, spiritual well-being would suffer. So we saw the well-being of the workers a problem. We saw competitive differentiation as becoming a problem. We saw innovation as one of the challenges that needed to address. Those were some of the things we were looking at that time.
I'm taking notes as we're going along. You've mentioned now a couple of times this whole idea of trying to squeeze workers out. So can you speak to this a little bit more? Obviously, this is a problem. It seems like people are just totally, like, their work is all consuming in their life. I wonder, have we made any progress there? Is that I don't know. I get the feeling maybe now things are changing because, the problem has been brought to the surface. Maybe corporations, companies maybe they're using as a selling point more, that they'll, that they're invested in the, entire employee. Do you think that we're improving in that situation? Do you see things getting worse? And what do you think is the overall state of the union of how major corporations, major companies are treating their employees and the expectations that they have of their employees?
So it's interesting, Shlomo. So I think over the last 20 years, there has been positive movement, certainly in the way people think and speak and the amount of money that they're throwing at this. Has it really changed behaviors? That's questionable. During COVID, businesses softened. They needed to keep their employees engaged. They needed to take care of them. People were suffering, and corporations softened during COVID and immediately after COVID. But now we're seeing a swing back. So if you take, for example, the technology sector, where three or four companies alone let some 50 or 60,000 people go over the last few weeks, and hundreds of thousands of people have been laid off over the last month or two. That's not because they're doing badly. That's not because they don't have money. That's part of an efficiency drive. There's an opportunity now to tighten up. In some cases, obviously, there are questions of cost savings, but generally, many of the companies who were responsible for the biggest layoffs are showing enormous profits. And they might be looking ahead and worrying about recession and so on, but it was a very harsh layoff. And I think it demonstrates that is the case. Early on in my career, I would say to chief executives, who's your most valuable resource? And they would say, people, of course. And I would say, if I came to you with a program that would enable you to earn what you are at the moment and continue growing at an even faster rate than you are at the moment without people, would you be interested? And they all said immediately, roll it on. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I said, so people are not your most important resource. People are your biggest nuisance. You just can't manage without them. But the moment you can manage without them, they're out. And I think that's the reality of it, that very few companies truly see people as valuable resources. And if they did, they would care for them as you care for a resource. I don't mean in the soft sense of mollycoddling them, as some companies have been trying to do. I mean, just giving people the opportunity to be creative, to work for something they believe in, to work in teams that are functional. There would be a lot more of that. And you're right, we're seeing it happening in pockets, but I wouldn't say it's happening across the board by any means.
So if you would ask them that question and they would say, well, yes, obviously if I can automate things and I can, save the money on a salary, of course I would. Like, are they right? Is that legitimate? Like, and obviously it's a very relevant question, because more and more we are going to find that machines and artificial intelligence and things like that are going to be taking over human jobs. Like, if you had to make the case, if someone would come to you and say, a CEO would come to you and say, listen, I could automate things or I can keep my employees, obviously it's costing me a lot more, what's the case to keep human beings when now we have more automated systems that may be more efficient and cost less?
Yeah, what you're saying is very important. So even if we were to take that benevolent approach and say, I'm going to keep my people, I'm not going to let my people go, you're only kicking the bucket down the road a little further. At some point, you're going to replace people with technology. But what's important is the need to redefine what people do. No human being should be doing what a machine can do. That's undignified. So as technology gets better and better, human beings have to get better and better, but not in the same way as technology does. We will never beat robots at being robots. And this is part of the problem. So if you say that AI can do what a lawyer can do, it can produce a beautiful contract and it can diagnose an illness. And you say, wow, aren't the robots getting clever? They're not getting smart. What they've revealed is that human beings have become robotic. If human beings, lawyers are robotic, and many, I'm not generalizing, obviously, but the profession has become robotic, and medicine has become robotic, and a lot of the businesses are requiring robotic activities of people. If people are going to become robotic, they deserve to be replaced by robots who are better at being robotic than they are. We've got to figure out what can we do that no robot possibly can. Certainly not in the foreseeable future, and that comes to our interaction with people, our engagement with people, the service industry, being able to inspire other human beings, imagination and creativity, being able to foresee future trends. An intelligent person is one who can see that which is just beginning to happen. A robot can't do that. Technology can only, and data, it's quite interesting. You remember big data used to be the term before OpenAI became the new term. Big data was the term until COVID. And since COVID, I personally haven't heard the word big data being used because big data let us down. It wasn't able to predict anything. We realized big data is just a massive dump of historic information. Now, we can do things with that historic information, but it can't predict the future. There can be one can understand trends, but only human beings can get an intuitive sense of where the world is going, to be to see something that other people are missing. Robots can't see. They can't look into the future. So there are a lot of areas that human beings are good, but then we have to educate them differently. We can't continue teaching them at school and at college what we've been teaching them for the last 100 years. It's irrelevant. It's not needed. We've got to totally redefine how we develop children at home. How do we develop adults at school and college? What our universities are meant to do, and what our businesses, how our businesses use people. So if a CEO said that to me, I would say that's great. Replace the people with then replace them. Get the technology to do whatever it can more efficiently. Where are the opportunities now to do things with people that robots can't possibly do?
I love that. And again, as a father now, my eldest daughter is already, she's going to be a senior. And, she's already asking the question, we're getting in the mail now, we're getting college, things from college. So, she's starting to think about, her career. But if you were to speak to a room of, seniors in high school or young, college students, and they're asking this question, everyone's talking about it, right? Chat GPT, AI, right? And are we all going to become obsolete? And, they have to make these decisions as to how they want to set themselves up for future success. Would you tell them go into specific professions? Would you tell them it's more the soft skills? Like, how would you guide the young person to make them feel that they will be competent for what's coming in the future?
So I think we need to, or they need to understand math, and they need to understand how to use technology. But more important, they need to understand how to think creatively, and they need to understand how to engage with people. And those are the areas that we're not really good at teaching. The schools are not teaching creative thinking, true creative thinking, and they're not teaching engagement with people. And it's more than social capabilities. It's not just the skills of social interaction. It's a deep empathy, learning how to empathize, how to be able to predict another person's needs before they even need it, to be able to predict, because that's what the service industry is going to require. It's interesting. I asked my granddaughter, not the ones that another one, and she was about 10 at the time. I said, "What are you thinking of being when you're big?" And she looked at me very quizzically and she said, "How would I know? What I'm going to be when I'm big doesn't exist." Now, for a 10-year-old to be thinking that way and to be understanding that, so one would say to young people, what you're going to be doing in 5, 10, 15 years' time probably doesn't even exist at the moment. So you can't prepare yourself for it. You can only prepare yourself to be the very best you that is possible to be. And for that, there are various things that one can do and various training, but that should be the focus of education, to prepare people to be the very best of who they can be.
Going back to something that you said before, again, this whole thing of employees that are constantly being squeezed by their employers. For most of my career, I would say I've had the privilege of really like working for myself and kind of, being able to be an entrepreneur. And I work together with my wife. We make a pretty good team, and we have a solid marriage, and we make a solid working team, and we run an organization. Probably would help us to have more employees, but whatever it is, right? We figure it out. There are different times in my life when we have worked and we've been part of a team, or at least, we've worked together with other organizations. I have found that teamwork within companies, within organizations, it seems to be so full of politics and toxicity. And again, I can't say that I've worked with, hundreds of teams. I can't say that I'm knowledgeable in this field, but I am curious. I'd like to ask you this question. Do you get a sense in your strategic consulting and your leadership consulting that the vast majority of teams within companies work well together, or that there is some level of dysfunction and toxicity?
And Shlomo, teams are like families. They're all dysfunctional. And the bigger they get and the more complicated, and then they get married and they bring other people into the team. A team is a family. It's an organism. It's living people with issues and egos and insecurities and ambitions, and you throw them all together. And again, unless you make them robotic and they just come to work and do their work, there is going to be dysfunctionality. What distinguishes high-performing teams from low-performing teams is the way they manage their dysfunctionalities, the way they acknowledge their dysfunctionalities and manage those. those dysfunctionalities, understanding one another's insecurities, and being able to work with those insecurities and not trigger people into defensive behavior. There's a lot that can be done about just building human beings. I've told my clients that I see business as a university of greatness. It's a place where people can develop their character. They can become greater human beings, because it requires so much from a person to function effectively in the complex environment of a business. So that doing so needs enormous personal development.
The reality, though, is, and this is one of the things that I fear, is that the reality is that often a company starts, or an organization, a Jewish institution, it starts by someone with an entrepreneurial spirit, a fire personality, like I would say, using the 4 elements that I write about so often, a fire personality who's extremely successful because he's driven, he's ambitious, he or she, right? They're driven, they're ambitious, smart, and with the deepest level of understanding of their clientele. And then they need to grow, they need to expand, but often the same things that contribute to success on an entrepreneurial level are often the things that make you a terrible boss. Because often these people have maybe a hint of, ego, arrogance, perhaps even narcissism. And maybe I'll regret what I'm about to say. Maybe you'll tell me that I have to edit it out. But I often find that also that even rabbis, who many of them, again, brilliant Torah teachers, good people, genuine people, holy people, right? But terrible bosses who, again, because of their drive and because of their excitement, it also comes along with a certain sense of the people that are around me, and especially like Jewish institutions, low budget operations, really trying to squeeze people. And often you find that the greatest, I don't want to call them leaders, but the greatest entrepreneurs, the people that drive growth, are often the people that create a lot of toxicity in dysfunctional teams. Have you found this, and do you have any remedy for this?
So yeah, particularly I work in the technology sector with startups, and startups who are scaling up. This is a massive problem, because what happens is the rate of growth of a startup is so fast that it outstrips the rate of growth of the people who founded it. People grow at a much lower rate than a successful business. So you were the right person when you started, and a few of you were working out of your parents' garage, and then very quickly this business is growing and growing. You can't grow at that pace. It's very, very difficult. And so the work that we do, for example, in the startup world at the moment is exactly that. Catching the founders and their teams up, catching them up to the growth of the company, and developing their midot, developing their character. An important part of what I do in business is really just applying principles of Musar, and demonstrating their values. So the ideas in the Torah of Musar, which is ethics and character development, taught for its own sake in the Torah world, we've applied in the business world and demonstrated through research over a long period of time the correlation between that and business effectiveness. So if it's taught correctly and people are coached through this growth, they can do amazingly well. But the average, you're absolutely right, the average person who starts an organization or a business very often is driven by ego, which is not a bad thing in the beginning. But unless that starts shifting and he starts pivoting and he starts growing as a human being, or she, it's more of a problem with men than with women generally, not exclusively. Unless they do begin that growth trajectory, then the organization outstrips them and they land up sabotaging the organization.
How much would you advise young people who are in a work situation? Well, let me ask it this way. You're speaking to a young person who's new, trying to build up their career. Number one, what are the red flags that you would hear that would go off? What are the sirens that would go off in your head when they're describing their work-life balance, where you'd say, you know what, this young person is on the way to become a workaholic, or they're in a situation that's toxic? And how do you advise a young person who is going down that road, but yet they want to be successful, they want to make money, and you see them going down this road that they're really selling their soul for success. So I guess again the question: what are the red flags? How do you see it? How can you detect that a young person has the wrong attitude towards work and that maybe they're not in a good situation? And what would you tell them?
So firstly, I don't really like the term work-life balance. Um, and here's why: because we don't talk about sleep-life balance, and we don't talk about eat-life balance, and we don't talk about the leisure-life balance, because we say, well, eating and sleeping and leisure is part of life. Well, so is work. Work is part of life. Business is part of life. That's how Hashem created the world. That we have to work, we have to trade with each other, and we have to do business in one. We're all selling. We're all in business in one form or another, and that's how Hashem wanted the world to be for good reason. But and therefore it's not about a matter of balancing your work and your life. It's about integrating your work and your life, so that you are the same person, whether you're sitting in shul or you're at home with your family or you're in business. Generally, we find that people are irrecognizable in business, that their own family don't recognize them in business. If we do a 360, let's say, of a manager in a business, he or she might get some low ratings in some surprising areas that, like, as you described, not a nice person and selfish and demanding and irritable and arrogant, all these kinds of things come up in a 360. And if you did that same 360 at home, he would come out amazing. His children would say, Dad's the greatest guy, and the wife might say, he's a great husband, everything good, everything fine. So what happens? People have this, that's part of the robotics I was talking about. When a human being becomes a robot, he or she becomes a very, very unpleasant being. If they can retain their humanity and be that same person with the same values and the same personality, yes, a different focus and a different pace and different sense of urgency, but the same values and the same personality, then you wouldn't have this happening. So that would be the red flag, to check, does he recognize his behavior in business? Do the people around him see it? Is he living one life? Is he living an integrated life? Or is he living two lives and trying to balance them? At the moment we talk about balance, you're acknowledging there are two things there. There's a duality. And you know, in our world, how achdut, the idea of oneness, is so central to everything we do. Everything comes down to a oneness. And a oneness of being, a oneness of personality, a oneness of life. That's what integration means. Integer means oneness. And to be able to integrate one's life is what's important.
I think the struggle, at least what I have found, is, at least, when managing employees, obviously I think it would be lovely to say that the workplace should feel like a family, and it should have that family vibe over there. Yet it is difficult, because if it feels too much like a family, then accountability becomes more difficult. Now, as I'm saying it, I'm thinking to myself, well, I guess, we do have accountability in our home also. I love my children, and I hold them accountable. But that's because I am their father, and, they're my children. So, I mean, is there a day? How does a person straddle that line between, yes, I want my workplace to feel like a family, but then does accountability become harder when I'm trying to create that environment? Does it become too loosey-goosey?
Yeah, so I don't think a workplace should be like a family. When I mentioned it earlier, I was talking about, on the negative side, the dysfunctionality of family that you find in a workplace. But I don't think a workplace should be like a family. As you say, a parent has a natural authority. A parent has a natural relationship with their children. It's not the same in business, where people come and go. People can leave. People can be fired. It's not a family. It's a different kind of an organism. But that doesn't mean that you as an individual should change your values. You change your method of management. You manage your children differently when they're 6 years old than you do when they're 18 years old. You change your management system, and certainly you would manage your teams and your company differently from the way you manage your family. But you can be the same person with the same values.
Got it. Can you speak a little bit? You have a beautiful book, which I loved reading,
Thank you.
Lead by Greatness. And you speak about a very powerful concept of every person has to discover their spiritual DNA. You refer to it also as a spiritual fingerprint. Can you discuss a little bit? Can you share with the listeners a little bit about what is a spiritual fingerprint? How does one discover it? And how does one use it?
So we know that there's such a thing as DNA, and a lot of our features are inherited through our DNA. And we know today that even with personality, this is a lot of our personality traits are inherited. We're born with them, and they're very difficult to change. Character is somewhere in between. Character, we're also born with character tendencies, with character traits, but we can develop them. It's a little bit more like muscle. So you've got blue eyes or brown eyes, and that's a feature, a DNA feature. You can't change that. When you're going to grow up to be 5'10" or 11, that's a DNA thing. You can't change that other than with growth hormone treatment and so on. And these are essential qualities of your DNA. Character is more like muscle. You're built with certain muscles, and you can choose to develop and grow those muscles or to just let them atrophy. That's something that you can do. Now, you might not have the muscles. I certainly don't have the muscle build to be an athlete, and never have. That's not what I was born to do, clearly. I can do other things. So by working at that, I'm never going to become a world-class athlete. It's not going to happen. But I can take what I'm given and develop it and become better and better at it. So it is with character. Each of us have character traits that we're born with. Some are weaker, some are stronger, and we can work on the weaker ones and we can develop the stronger ones. And that's really what character development is about. And in our case, what our leadership development is all about. So finding out what your character is, what are the values by which you make choices and decisions, not because you've been taught to do so, but because they're really inherent to who you are. And while we call it a fingerprint because it's just something that you have, it's not like a fingerprint in as much that over time it can evolve, it can change the major life events, there can be changes. But we have a methodology, which I describe in the book, for people to actually work out and map how they make decisions and choices. And what those fundamental, I call them value drivers rather than values. Values, we've all got good values, and research that I did, I think I mentioned in the book as well, revealed that criminals in prison have the same values as the Pope. Everybody wants their children to grow up to be fine and integrous and honest and open and fair and decent and everything. Everybody likes those things. The differences between us are the price we're willing to pay to uphold the things we believe in. That's where we differ from one another. You can have two Jewish people, both believe in God, they believe in the Torah, they believe in what the Torah tells them. Some will keep kosher and some will just find it too difficult. Some will keep Shabbat and some will just find it too difficult. That's where we differentiate from ourselves from one another. And so it is with character. I might be very honest, but if honesty is really going to cost me a lot of opportunity, I might make a little compromise, whereas somebody else wouldn't. Those are the things that differentiate us, and our spiritual DNA, as mapped in that spiritual fingerprint, is understanding what are those values to me. How do I work with them? What's my philosophy of values? How do I trade one off against another? If honesty means being unkind, which is going to take priority? If being kind means being a little dishonest, which is going to take priority? That defines who I am, and that's the spiritual fingerprint.
And I think that you recommend in your book finding, I believe you say 3 value drivers, and which one is kind of your primary and your secondary and your third. Is that correct?
Yes, most people, when we work with people, have between 6 and 8, between 5 and 8, or sometimes a few more value drivers. But at least to get the first 3 right is very important.
What would be a question that you would ask someone to think about as they're trying to figure out their value drivers?
It's difficult. You'll be quite interesting. We've just developed an AI-driven digital fingerprint capability, so that people will be able to do it digitally online. It's quite smart. That's a great example of where a few years ago, when I said to our team of coaches, prepare yourselves for the day where a robot will be able to do what you do. And they said, no, wait, coaching, a robot won't be able to coach. But the robots are doing it. And this one's pretty good. So there's a lot of question and interrogation that takes place in order to get to it. What we do is we ask the person to look through their life and the choices, the uncomfortable choices they've made, and ask themselves, what's the value that underpins those choices? That's where you've placed it. You'll find the places where you've already paid a price, where you've done something that wasn't expedient, and you did it because you thought it was the right thing to do. Probe those things. That's where you'll find your core values, and then probe the ones that you just won't compromise, because you feel if you compromise them, you compromise the essence of who you are. And there you start beginning to get to the essence. But it takes time. It took me a year to get to my spiritual fingerprint.
The goal of knowing, just to clarify one thing, the goal of knowing your spiritual fingerprint is for what purpose?
For your own development as a person. So it explains to you how you do things. It gives you a picture of you at your best. So that when you're feeling defensive and when you're feeling irritated, you can quickly pull yourself back to your fingerprint and say, this is who I really am. This is me at my best. This is who I could and should be. How does this person respond and how should they? And it also explains to you or to others what triggers you into defensive behavior. So when my core value drivers are compromised, let's say you are compromising my core value drivers, I will be triggered into defensive behavior, and that's when I do the things I later regret. Now, you will also be triggered if I compromise your core value drivers, but yours are different from mine. And we find this in marriage is a huge issue, because generally in a married couple's value drivers are very different and they complement one another. It's very seldom that they're the same. They're aligned, but they're different. So, for example, the wife might have love and caring and family, just for argument's sake, at the core of her value drivers. And he might have productivity and making a contribution and accomplishment at the core of her value drivers. And she now says to him, you've been working away for the last 7 or 8 hours. You haven't once told me that you love me. And he said, but I told you yesterday. Do I really need to tell you every day? Yes, it's a core value driver of his. And she can easily be offended there. He might look at another woman and she can feel terribly insecure. And say, I don't understand what that is. She's a colleague at work. I'm just being productive. We're just working on a business issue. It has nothing to do with how I feel about you. And she can't feel that because they have different value drivers. And if she says it's time to stop working now, let's take some time off, he gets triggered. You don't appreciate what I'm doing, and you don't appreciate the money I'm earning, and they get into a whole tizzle and argument. It's just about value drivers.
Yeah, it's amazing because I speak about this in my marriage courses, that it's amazing how human beings, we're so similar. So we are so similar, just the way we operate, but yet the small, I don't even know, even if it's just the final 10% or the final 5% that makes us different, really creates we operate on completely different operating systems. It's a fascinating thing just to see human relations through that lens.
But I forget the exact number, you might know, but apparently the difference between our DNA and that of an ape is just a few percent, and other animals is not much more. It's in that few percent that the difference lies. Yeah. You're right, and 95% or 93% we're animals, but that 5 or 7% is where the divine lies.
That's the game changer. Yeah. Just a couple more questions, if you have another few minutes.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that when you made this transition from being a business owner to a leadership strategy consultant, that you made a list of all the challenges, and then you wanted to look into the Torah, and you wanted to see how the Torah is going to address the future of business. Obviously, we know, right, the Jewish people, we are the people of the book. I grew up in yeshiva. There was endless emphasis on Torah study, daily Torah study, right? Kihem chayenu, this is our life. And we have a mitzvah to be kovea itim, to establish daily time studying Torah. So obviously Torah study is meant to be the central focus of a Jew's life. People have lots of different preferences. And I think that many, many people want to learn Torah that will really be directly relevant to their life. Now, I know you have a podcast. It's on Daf Yomi, a page of Talmud every single day. And what you do, it's short. You don't go through the entire thing, but you really extract one teaching and you make it very, very relevant and very personal. Now, if someone is not familiar with the Talmud and they listen to your podcast, I think that they would be ready to open up the Talmud and just listening to you, think that this is going to be exploding with relevant, practical advice. But it isn't. So the question, it isn't obviously like that. You really need to do a little bit of digging. So my question is, how would you guide someone who wants to be Kovea Itim, who wants to establish set time in their schedule to study, but Talmud study, right? They don't have the level of scholarship that you do, but they want relevance. They want to learn Torah that's going to make them a better human being. How would you guide someone in establishing a schedule of Torah study for themselves?
I think firstly you touch on just saying Kihim Chayenu, that the Torah is our life. That means it has to be relevant. Torah is our life doesn't mean you can bury your head in the books and now you've got your life. In some ways, yes, but it's a much bigger idea than that. Kihim Chayenu means Torah has the answers for your life. Torah has the direction for your life. Torah, all of that, which is, as I said to you, how I went to Torah to try and find these solutions. So Torah that isn't relevant, if somebody is studying and not able to extract a principle from what they've studied, it doesn't matter whether it's Talmud or it's Chumash or Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, whatever they're learning. If they can't take it and apply it, then they haven't learned. The idea of Lilmod al Manat La'asot doesn't just mean study the Torah so that you can do the formal mitzvahs of the Torah. Lilmod al Manat La'asot means study the Torah so that you can apply the Torah, so that you understand the relevance and the implications of the Torah. Without that, it isn't really Torah. You haven't really learned. So for me, I would, you mentioned the Matmonim podcast. Part of that is a counter movement for Daf Yomi. It's not a movement against Daf Yomi, but it's to try and slow down a little bit. That just the idea of turning pages and gaining information and knowledge as you turn the pages, that's not what the study of Torah is. The study of Torah is what it does to you. You can go to the gym to work out. If you look at it as I'm going to do something and check it off my list, that's one way of doing it. But the other is you're going to the gym for what it does to you, not for you what you do to it. You're lifting weights for what the weights do to you, not for what you do to the weight. You're going to put the weights back to where they were originally. You do nothing for the weights. It's what the weights do for you. And it's the same with Torah. It's to allow the Torah to work on you. And the only way the Torah can work on you is if you're able to extract relevance. So I would encourage people to find teachers, whether face-to-face teachers or online teachers, just teachers that inspire them. They need to, when you listen to Torah and you're studying Torah, you need to go away. You need to be able to say, wow, after every engagement. Now, I understand it happens sometimes. It isn't like that. Sometimes it appears quite boring and it's hard to find the meaning. But generally, you've got to question, if you're not saying, wow, this is the Torah, this is God's word, this is something we've been studying for thousands of years, this is the absolute brilliance of everything. I once hired a young woman who she was Jewish, she is Jewish, but knew very little about Judaism and about the Torah. And somebody asked her what I had studied and where my source of knowledge was from. And she said, the Talmud. And they said, well, what is the Talmud? And she gave a beautiful definition of the Torah, the Talmud. She said, I don't know really, but it seems to me the Talmud is that which, if you know it, you don't need to know anything else. And that's the sense of wow that one should have when you learn something. You should be able to say, oh my goodness, this changes my life. Everything is different. And find teachers that do that. It's not about entertainment and the amount of fun in the shiur and the laughter and the jokes in the shiur, and that's fine, but that's not what it's about. It's about, wow, that is amazing. Not the person is amazing, not the teacher is amazing. The content, what the Torah is teaching is amazing. And to search, and it might take you time to find that. You try one, if it's not working for you, drop it and try another. There's so many available today. It's not like the old days. You can afford to shop around until you find something that really talks to you.
That is fascinating. Thank you for that. That is great encouragement, and I encourage the listeners also. Rabbi Lapin, let's end off like this: take off the strategic consultant hat and put on the rabbi hat, and give us a big blessing to end off this podcast.
Yeah, I think the world needs it, doesn't it, Shlomo? The world is sick at the moment. The world is needing to heal, and we're seeing it in every area. We're seeing it in our own communities, in the Jewish community. We're seeing it in the wider world. We're seeing it in the climate issues. We're seeing it in the economic issues. We're seeing it in science and technology. We're seeing it in sociology. There's an insanity in the world. There's a disquiet in the world. There's a dis-ease in the world. There's just so much of it, and things are moving so fast, so that we need a moment to just slow down. I'd hoped that COVID would have done that for us, but it didn't take us long to get back to the old ways. Just a real idea of the brach we say at the end of the Shemona Esrei, that Hashem should bless us all with a sense of integrity, of oneness, of wholeness. Shalom comes from shalem, it's wholeness. We're very fragmented. The theme at the World Economic Forum this year was about fragmentation and fragmentalization. We're living very fragmented lives. We're living, the world is very fragmented. May Hashem bless us with shlemut and shalom to bring about the oneness and the integration necessary for our healing.
Amen.